book review time, and I promise today I'm not going to say that it was bad. Get ready for some seasonally appropriate spooky book review. The World Bible Outreach Center, 5 miles south of Dothan, Alabama, consisted of 23 glaring white buildings spread over 160 acres. The center of the complex was the huge granite and glass Palace of Worship, a carpeted and curtained amphitheater that could seat 6,000 of the faithful in air-conditioned comfort. Along the half-mile curve of the Boulevard of Faith, each gold brick represented a $5,000 pledge, each silver brick a $1,000 pledge, and each white brick a $5,000 pledge. Coming in from the air, perhaps in one of the center's 3 Lear executive jets, visitors often looked down at the Boulevard of Faith and thought of a huge white grin emphasized by several golden teeth and a row of silver fillings. Each year the grin grew wider and more golden. Across the Boulevard of Faith from the Palace of Worship, the long, low Bible Outreach Communication Center might have been mistaken for a large computer factory or research facility, except for the presence of 6 huge GTE satellite broadcast dishes on the roof. The center claimed that its 24-hour television broadcasting, relayed through one or more of 3 communication satellites to cable companies, television stations, and church-owned earth stations, reached more than 90 countries and 100 million viewers. The communication center also contained a computerized printing plant, the Press for Records recording studio, and 4 mainframe computers hooked into the Worldwide Evangelist Information Network. Just where the white, gold, and silver grin ended, where the Boulevard of Faith passed out of the high-security area and became Country Road 251. Just where the white, gold, and silver grin ended, where the Boulevard of Faith passed out the high-security area and became Country Road 251, where the Jimmy Wayne Sutter Bible College and the Sutter School of Christian Business, 800 students attended the 2 non-accredited institutions, 650 of them living on campus in rigidly segregated dormitories such as Roy Rogers West, Dale Evans East, and Adam Smith South. Other buildings, concrete columns, granite facaded, looking like a cross between modern Baptist churches and mausoleums with windows, provided office space for the legions of workers carrying out duties and administration, security, transportation, communications, and finances. The World Bible Outreach Center kept its specific income and expenses secret. But it is public knowledge that the center's complex, completed in 1978, had cost more than $45 million, and it was rumored that the current donations brought in around $1.5 million a week. In anticipation of rapid growth in the 1980s, the World Bible Outreach Center was preparing to diversify into the Dothan Christian Shopping Mall, a chain of Christian rest motels, and the $165 million Bible World Amusement Park under construction in Georgia. The World Bible Outreach Center was a nonprofit religious organization. Faith Enterprises was the taxable corporate entity created to handle future commercial expansions and to coordinate franchising. The Reverend Jimmy Wayne Sutter was the president of the Outreach Center and currently the chairman and sole member of the board of directors for Faith Enterprises. Carrion Comfort is a horror novel by Dan Simmons. It's completed around 765 pages, and who knows how many words because they are so tiny on the pages. Let's talk about the basic plot of Carrion Comfort. Considering it is such an epic novel, I'm not gonna be able to encapsulate everything in a quick synopsis. So there are going to be a ton of characters, and with it being horror, we never know how many of them are going to make it to the end, if any of them. Mild spoiler alert. Some people get out alive, some people don't. It's fairly depressing. First and foremost, Carrion Comfort is a book about mind vampires. That is, people who can control people's bodies through their minds. With enough contact, they also have the ability to completely delete the mind of the person that's inside of the body. Late in the novel, some of the main characters do some brain studies on some of the people who have had their minds taken over by the vampires and find that there is no one living left inside the head. They're basically brain dead. They're just meat puppets, that if that person no longer maintained the body, they would just lay there, drool, and they don't exist anymore. That mind is gone. Something else that makes these mind vampires stand out is that they gain energy or a feel of euphoria when they control someone, especially if it's to do something violent, typically very much when it specifically has to do with something violent. Most of the time, if the controlled person is not a long-term conditioned slave, called a cat's paw, then the person is killed after the usage is over. Just pretty much send them off, they kill themselves. They're programmed to kill themselves, that is, and the vampire who had control of them gets off on that ending. Another thing is they get off on enforcing their will upon others, upon feeling superiority, upon feeling power, upon feeling the subjugation of somebody else, and the fact that that person cannot fight them off. And this is the basis of what drives the actions of all of the mind vampires in this book. With that said, let's actually jump into some concrete information about characters and plot. This novel is set in 1980. Central protagonists include an older Jewish man named Saul. He is a Holocaust survivor and now a psychologist living in New York. Then there's Natalie, who's a black woman from the South. She is a college-age woman and the daughter of a photographer from South Carolina. Then there's Rob Gentry, a sheriff born and raised in Charleston, Carolina, which is where the first act of this book mostly takes place. He's hardworking, thoughtful, brave, but generally alone. He's around 40, not married, but he's friendly, but not married. He doesn't have any family of his own, and people like him, but he just kind of does his own thing. The novel opens on a scene involving some of the central antagonists. 3 mind vampires who have been friends for decades meet for their annual get-together where they share deaths that they've caused over the last couple of years. Well, over the last year, their big events. They take a lot of pride in their bigger named events. Some of them even claim to be the ones behind the assassination of JFK. They also claim to be behind a lot of murders, high-profile murders that make it to the front page, that have to do with politicians, that have to do with serial killers. They all kind of claim that and get really excited about that, especially when their cat's paws names are in the newspaper or their cat's paws get caught. The 3 who meet are named Willie, Melanie, and Nina. A little background on each of these 3 characters is necessary to continue forward, and anybody who's read this can correct me if I'm wrong. I think Melanie was a fairly average person, just kind of living a fairly normal life with her family in Charleston. And by her family, I mean her cat's paw, her assistant, Mr. Thorne. Nina was a retired fashion model, a gorgeous girl, and Willie was an ex-Nazi, an Oberst who ran some pretty sadistic games for his own pleasure during the Holocaust. At this annual meeting, Melanie tells the other 2 that she would like to retire from the games. She doesn't like to play this game of, cause as much damage as you want anymore. She kind of just wants to relax. And after they share their stories, they depart. The night ends early. Willie, since it's now 1980, produces films in Hollywood and has made a name for himself as a movie producer and director, usually of some kind of horror flicks. Remember, Willie is the ex-Nazi. He gets on a plane to return to Hollywood and the plane explodes. Melanie believes that Nina is behind it and goes out to find Nina, who is staying in a hotel in town until the morning after. She wants to kill Nina because she believes that her friend is going after her next. She thinks that Nina has turned on all of them and first went after Willie and is then coming after her. Melanie and Nina, and possibly someone else, take control of multiple people in Charleston in an attempt to kill each other. This results in the death of at least 9 people, which is then called the Charleston Massacre. The 9 people who were involved in this had no connection to one another whatsoever, except for Mr. Thorne, who belonged to Melanie as her cat's paw. One of the other casualties is Nina, who ends up getting shot through the head in a hotel that she was staying in by the boy who worked in the hotel, just a 19-year-old guy with no connection to any of them. One of the victims was also Natalie's father, the black girl, the photographer, and that's how Natalie becomes one of our main characters in this novel. She wants to know why her father died, what pulled him in, and she wants to know who had done that to her father. While Sheriff Gentry, the sheriff of Charleston, wants to figure out why this happened in his city, he feels a personal responsibility to bring justice and connect these things and figure out just why it happened, and hopefully make sure it never happens again. He's a good guy. Saul, the psychologist I mentioned earlier, visits Sheriff Gentry to say that he'd been Nina's therapist back in New York 2 times and wanted to share any information he could about her. But what he is really going in for is information for himself. You see, Willie, the Holocaust Oberst, was someone that Saul had known and had personal dealings with when he was in the Holocaust camps, because Saul is a Holocaust survivor. He had been chasing the ghost of Willie for decades. He was sure that Willie was alive, and he wanted to find him. He had seen parts of his body in pictures and on television. He was sure of it, but he had never been able to confirm or confront Willie. So all this time it has been to try and find Willie. And here, with Nina involved, he is sure that he knows. So he goes in pretending he knows more than he does, offering some information to the sheriff so the sheriff can kind of share, but also trying to get his own information to see if the sheriff knows anything. Natalie goes to Melanie's house because Melanie had a nice little house in Charleston, which is where her and her friends had met, and she goes looking to see if she can find anybody that would connect that why her father was the one that was murdered. This is where she runs into Saul, who is hiding in a closet, who went there also looking for hints. Natalie believes that Saul is an enemy and forces him to tell her why he is there. Eventually, he explains his background in Germany and Poland and his eventual escape from the camps. Then he explains the mind vampires bit. Sheriff Gentry shows up at Natalie's house, and he is also told about the past, and he believes it. And they do explain why Gentry believes so quickly in this small passage. "But my story goes beyond logic, into the supernatural," said Saul. He felt foolish arguing with the sheriff, but he could not accept the Southerner's immediate acceptance. Gentry shrugged. "I always hate in those vampire movies where they get corpses stacked up all around them with 2 little holes in their necks and all, and some of them corpses are coming back to life and all, and it always takes the good guys 90 minutes of the 2-hour movie to just convince the other good guys that vampires are real." Saul rubbed his beard. "Look," Gentry said softly, "for whatever reason you did tell us. So now my choices are, 1, you're part of this somehow. I mean, I know you didn't kill any of those folks personally. You were on a panel at Columbia on Saturday afternoon and evening. But you could have been involved. Maybe you hypnotized Mrs. Dayton or something. I know, hypnosis doesn't work like that, but people don't usually take over other people's minds either. 2, you could be crazy as a bedbug, like one of those yahoos that comes out of the woodwork to confess each time there's a murder. Or 3, you could be telling the truth. I'll go with number 3 for now. Besides, I got some weirdness of my own going on here, and that fits your story and nothing else." So, immediately, it's explained why Gentry believes this fantastical thing, which is super helpful because often when you're in a situation that has these supernatural things or somebody says something outrageous, characters will either believe it and you'll be like, what the frick? Nobody would just believe that. Or you have, like Gentry was saying, they argue the whole time until, oh wait, now they're forced to, but everybody is dead. I have read quite a few stories where somebody gets magical powers and then they just tell everybody that they have magical powers and everyone's just like, yeah, okay, cool. They're not like, no, you're nuts. They don't even question it. And that tends to be a flaw in logic. The 3 then form a team where really none of them really wants to involve the others because they fear the danger that they'll be put in by becoming involved, without really telling each other that they're going to continue the investigation on their own and discover different information that will eventually they'll all have to share with each other, and it'll all lead them kind of in the same place. So they all want to be a part of this investigation. They all don't want each other to be a part of this investigation because of danger. They're not going to tell each other what each other is doing. And they're all kind of going to dig their own deep hole. The book is broken down into 3 parts. So if you think of the 3-act structure that I mentioned before, this does it very clearly because it goes book 1, book 2, book 3, but it's all just in one book. Each of the parts act on their own with basic scenery and supporting cast that come with a climax for the whole act. The first act takes place in Charleston, where Saul, Gentry, and Natalie first meet, share information, get us the basics of what's going on with these people. We also get some eyes into the bad guys. We get to watch the bad guys. There are more people than Willie and Melanie. The 3 of them, Saul, Gentry, and Natalie, all separate and do their own things, investigating their own blind spots. And Act 2 mostly takes place in Philadelphia with local gangs, the FBI, and the woman named Melody staying in an old mansion named Gumplethorpe. And then Act 3 mostly concerns a handful of mind vampires, like 5 or 6 of them, coming together on an island for an annual shindig, where they play a Hunger Games type game with surrogates they control and bet on who wins. This is called the Island Club, and you get talks about the Island Club all throughout. There are 2 parts to the Island Club. The first part of the Island Club is when they invite only big influencers, male influencers specifically to the island. So politicians, television stars, anybody that would be big deal that is not a mind vampire themselves, because then they get to sow their seeds with them and make friends. And sometimes sow seeds could be taken sexually. Then part 2, all of the normal world influencers have left, only the mind vampires are behind, and then they play their Hunger Games thing for the next week. In this case, in the book, Willie pushes to say that if he wins, he wants to turn the Battle Royale game into a long-running worldwide game of chess, where you get to control more than just 1 or 2 people on an island. You get to control whole continents. Earlier on, he tries to do a show of this to get the game started, to send a message to his fellow mind vampires before meeting with them in person. And it could have set off a world war. That's all I'm going to say. Considering there is so much content and so many characters, it switches who it focuses on between Saul's group, Natalie, Gentry, a couple different mind vampire types, and sometimes some of the gang members, and Melanie, who is a mind vampire, but her story is told a little differently, which you actually get it in first person. Everybody else in this book is told from a third-person perspective, usually a deep third person, and it does do cuts between each of the perspectives when it changes perspectives, but Melanie is always in a chapter by herself, and it's a first-person chapter. And it really gives you insight into the paranoia that she suffers from, and the mental illness, and also just the kind of monster that she is. Because where the monsters come out in this, it's not like Freddy Krueger, it's not super gory, it's not like Monster from the Deep Lagoon. It's a complete dismissal of the value of life and the way some of these people, specifically the mind vampires, treat life. There's a scene in there where Melanie creates her own new family so that she can go back to Charleston, and what she does to the family, just the casual way that she talks about it, is so disturbing, and that's where the horror really shines. Because you have so many perspectives and people involved with one another, one of the interesting things that this book also does is that you get to see how different people's actions affect different people's lives. You don't necessarily see the different strings being pulled immediately between people, but it'll play out a scene or an entire segment, move on to another perspective, and you can see the dominoes lined up, or to be more appropriate, the chess moves being made from each side as they're being made. This book uses the idea and image of chess often, as it is the Oberst's favorite game. He plays it with his humans in his camp, he plays it in real life with people, and he has a custom-made chessboard and pieces at home. He, and I think a couple other characters in there, mention how important it is to know chess, and one of the characters in there who never really got into chess but was close to Willie is like, yeah, I should have paid more attention to chess. Despite the length of this novel, it is a very quick read in the fact that you get through it so fast. The way that Dan Simmons has crafted the dialogue is very natural. It's very fun. His characters are deep and intense, and some of them are evil. There is rape in here. There are bad people that you get to follow, that you have to follow. And it's a very interesting combination of these people who don't care, have no empathy at all, only care about themselves, versus these other people that are trying to seek out truth, that are trying to find justice, that are connected to other people. It's actually very interesting to see Natalie and Saul and some of these other characters go into these other communities and care about these people or connect with people that aren't very much like them or are kind of different from them. From a writer's perspective, there's a lot to take away from the way that this book is crafted, from the switching of the perspectives, which I always see a lot of authors love switching perspectives to give more information on characters, but it's different than head hopping. He doesn't switch from head to head to head when he's in a scene. He completes a scene with one perspective and then moves on to the next perspective. And so if you want to do a story crafted from multiple perspectives, I highly recommend reading this book to see how he has crafted that. He also has an excellent sense of humor. His characters are fun and light if they're meant to be. Like, Gentry is a completely enjoyable character. I just loved his character so much because it was just nice. He was a nice guy. And he was he had the funniest dialogue, but some of the other guys had funny dialogue that was dark humor. So Dan Simmons' voice is intense, but it's also humorous when he wants it to be, and that's a good juxtaposition. Dan Simmons also does description very well. Character setup, description. When you're first meeting a character, you get the whole picture of who they are and how they act and what to expect of them. Like when you first are introduced to Gentry, it's been like one or two paragraphs at least describing his office and his physical description, and it never feels boring and it never feels overdone, and you at the end of it you can completely see this person. It's effortless, it's interesting, and it's well written. So I highly recommend this book if you like horror, if you want something a little different, if you want something epic. Read this book. It is easily in my top favorites now of favorite books, and I'm going to have to pick up much more Dan Simmons so I can get to know more of his work. He is an excellent author if this is any book to go off of. Have you read Dan Simmons' Carrion Comfort? Do you have any recommendations for books that I should read next? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you next time.